Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Well, I'm glad that we're back for the Time for a Reset podcast. This morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Stephen Taylor, who's had an illustrious career in marketing. Started with a schooling in Procter & Gamble many years ago. Not too many years ago, Steve, and has since then run marketing at many large organisations, including Samsung, Findus, and most latterly as the European CMO for PayPal. So I'm going to get Stephen to just briefly introduce his background, and then as normal, we're going to jump into a conversation around the thing that Stephen would like to set a reset on in marketing.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Paul, so thanks very much for the invite. And unfortunately, I'm at the stage of the career where I'm either described as a veteran or a senior marketer, which is always a bit worrying. But I think, as you said, I've been grounded in the world of FMCG, the importance of brand building, understanding your customer and being obsessive about that. But I've also had a great opportunity to change tack and get into technology and then digital-only products. And I think actually seeing the spectrum of marketing has probably been the most interesting thing about my career, and how people come from different ends of the spectrum, whether it's about brand or whether it's about performance marketing. And I think it's that piece that I'm finding most intriguing at the moment.
And I think that's a really interesting place to start, isn't it? Because the world, I guess, that P&G grew up in and built its marketing playbook for is very different to a direct-to-consumer brand launching today. How much do you think marketing has really changed versus how much do we like to believe that it's all kind of shiny new things?
I think there's too much being made of the shiny new things, because if you break down the marketing from those days, it was all about understanding the who. That's your customer obsession. Who's the prime prospect that's most likely to buy the product, whatever it is. Then it was the what. What's your value proposition that you're going to offer to that customer? Mm-hmm. And the final bit was the how, and the how was how you got your messages out. I think the how has changed most radically because the tools to get to the customer have changed, the channels are different, TV is not as important, digital is clearly leading the way, but the fundamentals haven't shifted. And I think that's the bit that people are getting wrong. People are obsessed with is digital only or it's brand. And I think there's still the blend of those two tools are the things that are going to help you succeed today.
Yeah, so I think we talked about just before we started, Ritson, his recent piece was around, he's seeing from the latest Ubiquity numbers that the audiences that linear TV is going south quicker than even he expected. But at the same time, he professes to believe that TV is still the best way to build a brand and still the best way to build a successful marketing business. There will be some that might sit here and say, well, I can build my business without television today. So to me, there's the really data-driven thinking about every pound I spend and how it returns in a real short-term model. And then there's the investing for the future. Do today's brands that are launching have the time to wait for investment in big traditional media for it to return? Or do you think that things like TV can actually pull through in the short term to deliver value for a business?
I think it can, and I think you can prove that out. And I've done media mix modelling in a number of businesses, and you can get ROIs with TV that can compete with your digital. I think it's all about balance, and I think people get a little bit freaked out by big amounts of money on TV being a waste versus actually smartly done. In a modern world, TV is just a part of the mix.
Yeah.
Out of home plays a role. We used to get great return for cinema ads. So again, being very cognizant of digital only will not build you a brand if you don't do something different. And that for me is getting emotional connections.
Yeah.
And I think the mix of channels is the skills that people need to bring. And it goes back to your who. And you can have a different mix depending on who is that target customer and where are they going to seek most relevance from your brand. Yeah. So I think the important thing is yes, performance marketing is crucial because it's super attributable. The CFOs love it, but to think it's the only thing that will build you a brand versus building you a business, I think a business will run out of steam if you haven't created the emotional connections. And I think that's when people get to the point where, if your world gets disrupted and people will copy the app or the product or the service,
sure.
what the attributes you've built are keeping you differentiated.
Yeah,
keep you differentiated.
Yeah.
No, and I think if that goes away, people will struggle.
Oh, and let's face it, the biggest advertiser in the world now is Amazon. I saw they spend $13 billion on advertising yet a few years ago. The certain founder of the business said that marketing's only for those folk that create poor products. So it's interesting how viewpoints change. I think Amazon, Facebook and Google are three of the world's biggest advertisers. So they've obviously understood this piece around emotional connection.
I think Jeff's tone might have changed a bit, because he also said, doesn't it, brands is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
That's right. Which
is, again, is, I think, an interesting perspective.
Yeah, maybe it was just a nugget for an interview, right?
Yeah,
rather than a long-held belief. So you mentioned the CFO a second ago, and I always like to step back a little bit to understand the role of marketing in an organisation. Do you feel marketing is now more important to business today, or do you think it's perceived as less important? There's lots of talk around the CMO role and whether the CMO role is driving growth, and is it leading transformation, or is that the CIO? I mean, you live in that world, right? You live in a world of working with different board members. I'm really fascinated to hear how you've seen that change over the last couple of decades.
Well, clearly my answer's biased, right? Because I am a CMO, so it's clearly the most important role in the boardroom. I think the issue has become, it's sort of been a bit marginalised, I think, over the last 5 to 10 years, because everybody's convinced it's been transformed, or the marketing world has been transformed. So unless you're completely abreast of those changes and you're convincing your fellow board members that you are, you can lose credibility. And I think that it's a critical time right now for CMOs and marketers to re-establish the critical nature that they play, because I've been in businesses that have needed the combination of performance marketing and brand marketing, and those two working together is a growth driver.
Yeah.
And as long as you can prove that out to people, you'll get the credibility back. So I think it's always, you've got to work hard, and I think people have to always reinvent what they know about their own business. And I always say I'm beautifully humble by being convinced 50% of what I'm doing is wrong at any one point. And then you try and get your teams to think about what are the things you need to do differently. Where are we not good? Because that's the only way you'll convince the board members you're doing the right thing.
Right. That's a nice way of looking at it. And do you feel that marketing needs to do a job to define itself as taking more responsibility for, I guess, what is being termed digital transformation? I mean, every business, I saw a statistic this morning, 93% of businesses say digital transformation is important to them. God knows what the other 7% are doing, but something like 50-odd% of the business is not quite sure what that means.
Yeah. And
you talked about earlier the customer growth. I mean, the things you're talking about there feel like they're pretty kind of crucial to a business growing, yet I see many organisations creating marketing under customer or below commercial, and not necessarily at the same level as some of those other C-level roles. So what in your view should be the remit that a CMO has today?
Well, I think they should be totally across that digitisation, certainly from an outbound perspective. I mean, you could argue some digital transformations talk about, the in-house systems and how people are looking at data, but I'm a big believer in the external world, and the touch points that the customer sees should be under the remit of marketing. And actually, probably in Samsung and PayPal, we did most of our work sorting out some of that digital infrastructure,
right,
making sure that we were administering websites well, whether our CRM capabilities were up there, how consistent were we being with SEO strategies and that type of stuff. And that was all under the remit of the CMO, and you had to work hard to make sure that the rest of the business were aware of what you were doing, because sometimes I'd call it the dirty work goes unnoticed, and actually it's only the flashy stuff, like the adverts, that people ever take notice
above
of.
their radar. Yeah.
But I would say 50% of my role in the last two roles has been really sorting out how you get stuff out the door, really effectively in an agile and effective way.
Right. Okay. Very good. And going back to your point around, I guess, the who and the how, technology is changing both of those things dramatically, right? Who you're talking to or who you could potentially talk to, and the means through which you talk to. So I guess there's a view that technology decisions need to be customer and consumer driven, yet often they're process and operationally driven. How have you in your career kind of partnered with the technology or the CIO type role to join that up? Because I don't think there's enough talked about that in marketing.
No, and again, if you go back, old school was, survey-based segmentation, personas, and you've now got into a world where people could say, surely segmentation is over because you should be able to personalise to the one, to the individual. I still think there is a role for a better understanding of what segmentation looks like within businesses, because you still need to break people down into clusters of audiences.
Yeah.
And I think that's a job that you need to work hand in hand with the business, because if it's very internal, purely transactional data, it falls a little bit flat. You need to then say, well, okay, we've got some transactional understanding of what the customer's doing. How do we get context around behaviours and the whys?
Yeah.
And that's the blend that I think gets you to a better answer.
Okay. And does that mean that over time you think that it's possible to do more of the things that marketers have previously outsourced? If you join those dots up like you just talked about, does that mean that you as a marketer think more about, well, what capability should I build myself versus outsourcing some of that? Or do you think that because the expertise for executing on marketing is not like the core part of what Samsung or maybe it is for P&G, because P&G is a marketing driven organisation, but the vast majority of businesses, their core business is not actually delivering marketing all day long. Where do you stand on kind of in-housing, out-housing, all of this raging debate that we're seeing?
Well, raging debate. I mean, again, I think there's different parts of the value chain where I think you need to make some decisions, and sometimes people shy away from those decisions. I think if you go to the real pointy end, great creative, I still believe, is done by people that do creative a lot.
Yeah.
I think if you go more to the systems end, I mean, marketing technology, the technology stacks that you've got, chunk of that stuff you should be buying and bringing in-house, and having people that are operationally savvy and know how that works. I think there's still a debate around media, how much of that do you take in-house, but I still believe the capabilities of agencies that are dealing on multiple brands with multiple products will have greater insight than doing that ourselves. So I think there's a different answer for businesses across the different parts of the value chain, but I think having healthy joined up agency relationships is still a critical part of marketing.
Good day. Do you, if you were advising, I guess, some of the agencies or holding groups about how they should adapt and change themselves to deliver better to someone like you, what do you see happening, and what do you think they should be doing more of to stay in line with that view?
I think everybody's grasped the fact that a lot has been said that the agency model is broken, and I think having siloed specialties is not a good approach to have, and I think people are trying to tackle that. It's just the relative speed that they're doing it, because you're still getting people targeted as they're digital specialists, and you sort of go, yeah, but what do you mean by digital specialists? Or they're just a creative house.
Yeah.
And I think in a way the client really wants those things to work together, otherwise they're doing the joining up at the client end, and that's not value added either.
Yeah.
So I think that the push towards being more joined up, having people that understand the end-to-end of marketing is the best thing for a client to get to, and I'm not sure anybody's doing it brilliantly.
Right. No. I think everyone, like you say, I think the problems are identified. The solutions maybe are not quite there yet, or maybe they're not being delivered quickly enough. Might be the right way of putting it. And we touched a little bit there on data. I think we're seeing businesses with the highest markup, the ones that actually have powerful kind of data that helps them predict and kind of determine where their new markets, their new audiences will be. But not every business has obviously got the benefit of selling product online or having search data or whatever. So What's your view about like let's take an FMCG actually, because you've spent a lot of your career there. If you're an FMCG that sells most of their product through retail, doesn't really have a direct to consumer view, what would you be thinking about in terms of how you crack this data piece? I'm sure that the CEO of most FMCGs is going, we need to better understand our customers and know how to get to them. But how do you do that if you're not an online e-commerce transactional business? It's very easy if you're in that space, or you're a digital native business, isn't it?
You're asking me, but maybe I moved on, what was it, 8 to 10 years ago from that world, so I'm not sure how up to date my answer will be. But I think if you go back to the basics of what those businesses built themselves up on was a deep consumer understanding, which really came out of focus groups and almost what I'd call a micro level understanding. The world is now sort of aggregated up a level into lots of data, and I think the routes to go is try to get as much of that qualitative understanding and own that,
right,
and have that real understanding. But then you've got to try and work out where the external sources where I can quantify and get the sense of where those audiences are actually sitting and where they're playing. So I think it's a bit of like, triangulation, using other people's data to work out, where your right audiences are. So I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, that makes sense. And would you be, do you, I mean, there are a lot of businesses that are thinking about, if I don't have data, I need to create this magic first party data so that then I can plug it into systems to be able to find people. Do you think that is, with everything that's going on with personal data and GDPR, do you think that's a fad, or do you think building better understanding of potential customers and having that data will be a long-term route to success?
I think it depends at what cost, right? I mean, for a lot of businesses, the ability to do that is quite limited. So again, I think partnerships, really understanding what GDPR has done, because again, I'm not sure people have dissected the post-GDPR world brilliantly to say, well, this is actually what's happened.
Yeah.
And I think, if I take some of our learnings, it was almost not as dramatic as people thought, and we've got better quality responses from a smaller group of people.
Yeah.
Not necessarily all bad. But I think really understanding that, I don't think every business has to go and develop the first party data to be its biggest USP. Okay. I think it's too costly.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, opportunity cost is is a pretty fundamental thing in most businesses, yet I think a lot of people are throwing a lot of money at gathering that data, but not quite sure what they're going to do with it yet. That's what I see a lot of happening. Okay, stepping back, again, we talked at the beginning around kind of marketing as a growth driver. When you run or construct marketing teams, marketing strategy, how do you kind of ensure that the focus is on how are we going to grow this business?
Well, I think it's getting super aligned on the KPIs that are most critical. And I think that when marketing has to prove that it is adding value and it is contributing to growth, it is make sure that you've got the KPIs that the business is valuing at the centre of what you're trying to do. Show your impact on those KPIs, and that's when you'll get rewarded. If you've got the wrong KPIs, you're measuring the wrong things, and people are going to ignore what you're doing. So I think being super aligned on those.
Okay. And if you were building a brand today, is there anything that you would think about constructing the marketing organisation differently? Like most of the organisations you walk into, you have to transform them because they're already set. But let's say you walked into startup X and you needed to build that brand. Like, what would the foundations be of how you would build a marketing team? I mean, it sounds like you take a lot of the learnings from how you build a brand in another organisation, but you're also talking a lot about digital technology data. Would you construct it very differently, or do you think it is pretty much the same as it was when you started in Gillette?
Well, I know. I think there's a whole set of new capabilities that have arisen that I do think you have to have people that are well versed in the latest technology on being able to get your programs to the right people at scale, and with the ability to still understand what you're standing for as a brand and the values that you're bringing to play, as well as the functional attributes. Yeah. And I think it's actually having those two working together. And sometimes I do think that people silo things off a bit too much. So you have this is the growth marketing department or the
totally,
performance marketing department, and I've been in...
There's a lot of those roles in the market right now.
Yeah, and sometimes they've even been completely separated by people that deal with brand. Like, that's the colouring in department over there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a dangerous world, because you end up with disconnects and materials going out of the door that don't link back to what you said your brand was going to stand for. And that's the thing that will, mean that you can build a business, but you won't necessarily build a sustainable. Branded business. If you like.
I hear you. And do you think we're doing enough as a marketing industry to develop people that can cut across those different areas? Because I think, as you said, and I've definitely experienced in my agency career, that there are a lot of people that are very good with deep specialisms, but there aren't quite as many people that have got that T-shaped ability to cut across brand building, planning, customer insights, CRM, and going and kind of executing in digital. Where are those people going to come from? Do we train and develop them well enough?
I think there's an element of some of it has to come from the individuals, right? Because some people go into marketing with a very defined view of what they're good at, and if you're a good creative storytelling individual,
right,
you're not going to be the person that I would set you up to do our data analytical, trawling. I think we need to create opportunities that people can get a deeper understanding of each other's worlds, but by its nature, there is a lot of specialty that is arising, and I think what the best that you can do is just create the right environment that people can stretch themselves. It needs to come from the individual, because I think forcing people to do stuff they're not happy to do or comfortable with is never a good approach. But I think we could do more with getting people deeper in the understanding of each other's worlds.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Okay, well, we are almost coming to a close. So the one last thing I'd just like to ask you to comment on is, if you were giving advice to listeners that are kind of in a marketing organisation and thinking about how they drive growth and how they deliver that in this fragmented, very difficult landscape, what would that advice be, Stephen?
I think there's always the pull to get yourself very fragmented, and I think actually being really focused is probably the best counter to that. And by being focused, I think it does go back to understanding your prime audience. Not the people that you might get to at some point, but your primary target.
Centre of the dartboard.
Centre of the dartboard. Think about where you're going to get to them in the best way, and be super razor sharp that your value proposition is differentiated. And that can be on a functional level, but ideally you've got an emotional level there as well. And I think those are the disciplines that stand true in most businesses, and it's easy to get distracted for the latest fads and the latest technology doing X, but if you get those things right, that's normally the best recipe for winning.
Excellent. Well, I think you beautifully brought us back to where we started, which is a lot has changed, but in some ways nothing has really changed. So thank you, Stephen. Appreciate your time. Been extremely insightful, and I'm sure that the listeners will have found some real nuggets in the conversation we've had.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you for tuning into this latest podcast. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll be back again very soon, interviewing a senior marketer and understanding what they would like to reset in the marketing industry. In the meantime, if you want to check out me, you can find me on Twitter, Paul_Framp, and you can find my new business, which is a hybrid marketing consultancy helping with in-housing, digital strategy and marketing attribution at controlvexposed.co.uk, on Twitter under CVE, or on LinkedIn under controlvexposed. Look forward to you coming back next time and having more interesting conversations. Thank you.